As 2024 draws to a close, we reflect on the year's biggest stories. For Canadians, it's been a year marked by extreme weather events, from raging wildfires to devastating hurricanes and snowstorms. The nation's political landscape has been just as turbulent, with allegations of foreign interference, non-confidence motions, and a flurry of provincial elections, 3 of which took place in a single month. Our journalists were on the ground covering every twist and turn as Canadians voted to elect their new leaders. And in our first story, we take you behind the scenes of our election coverage.
In journalism, there's nothing quite like covering an election. Lucky for us here at Global, we got to cover 4 of them in the span of just 2 months. Unprecedented in this country with 4 provincial elections, the first one here in British Columbia. And we got to use this incredible touchscreen, a way to show British Columbians and Canadians a way around the province to understand how their vote matters. And we had an incredible race, one that came down to 1 seat and just 22 votes. This led to the NDP's majority government. But whenever you're covering one of these things, the key is always preparation. Here's my colleague Amy Judd from the Global BC web team.
Election night is busy, of course, for an online team, but really the preparation that goes into election night takes weeks and weeks.
But no amount of prep work could have prepared us for what election night brought. Not only was it this incredibly close election, it was an atmospheric river, rain pouring across Metro Vancouver, closing polling stations, but also putting our teams to the limit, having to cover both a provincial election and a storm that led to a number of people dying.
We were able to do as much news as possible in that time and make sure we had all the video updated. The news hour content was all uploaded online, and we were able to then still turn our attention to the election. But definitely challenging with 2 big breaking stories on the same day on a Saturday.
When you watch election night on TV, it looks simple, right? You click on the riding, you see those numbers, you see that decision made of someone being elected. But there's a team behind that. It's led by Deb. It's our decision desk. And what was so unique about BC is because there were so many close ridings in the province, everyone went to sleep on election night without a winner actually being declared.
There's 7 races that are too close to call. There was enough that could have pushed the Conservatives to majority. There was enough that could have pushed the New Democrats to majority. And we knew that the count for absentee ballots and mail-in votes wouldn't happen until much later. It wouldn't happen on that night. So there was just simply no way to call that race. I think it just comes down to explaining to people why that happens, and that's the most important job.
Finally, after 9 days of counting and recounting, ultimately a decision made. David Eby remains the Premier of British Columbia, narrow majority. But then there was more. New Brunswick next, then Saskatchewan, then Nova Scotia. For Deb and others, that meant time on the road to ensure that Canadians, those living in these provinces, had the information they needed to make their crucial election decision.
There was a 22-day stretch. I had 1 day off, and I was at home for 4 of those 22 days. And then, of course, we didn't know Nova Scotia was a snap election.
Well, I was here in front of the touchscreen in BC. My colleague, Chief Political Correspondent David Akin, provided the results from New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Nova Scotia. New Brunswick, the only change election we saw through these 4, and it brought the first female premier in New Brunswick history, Susan Holt. And one of the challenges for Akin doing so many elections, you need to learn so many names of ridings and candidates.
The really cool part about watching the House of Commons is you're hearing like a little bit of a postcard every day for 15 minutes from MPs from all over the place. And you can't help but start to get to know, northeastern New Brunswick, or as they say, southern Saskatchewan.
And then it was on to southern Saskatchewan and the rest of the province. The 3rd election in that 2-month window, just a few days after New Brunswick. And we had crews covering across the province, including right here in Scott Moe's home riding of Rosthern-Shellbrook. He was the Saskatchewan party leader, ultimately won re-election, but didn't do it emphatically, and there wasn't a lot of excitement around the campaign or election night. Gates Gorin is one of my colleagues from Global Saskatoon, and he watched this incredible scene unfold in the downtown hockey rink.
We're there to set the stage. We're there to paint the picture. So I could only really go off what I could see. And in the beginning of the night, it was that practice. And a little bit later on, I think the best part of the night was just seeing the Zamboni kind of go up and down the ice, because that's all we could report on. You could tell that everyone is kind of enthralled by this, because this is the most action that we were getting.
Gates and his colleagues across Saskatchewan also described very different atmospheres. While the Saskatchewan party won, the headquarters were somber. The NDP, they finished second, official opposition, but yet there was excitement. Here's that description from Gates around the difference between the two headquarters.
If you just muted the television and just saw the two headquarters kind of side by side, you could probably just make an assumption that the NDP had won the election.
Then the final stop here in Nova Scotia. Tim Houston saw the opposition was weak, called a snap election, and was able to grow his majority government. Those are often not fun elections to cover, but Elections Nova Scotia had a different idea. Let me show you right here the riding of Eastern Shore. There was a small community called Mushaboom where there was an issue with one of the polling stations. They delayed voting there by an hour. That meant that they delayed the results across Nova Scotia by an hour, leading our team at Global Halifax and across the province to have to tap dance to explain to voters what was going on without those critical results.
We did a lot of rehearsals over the weekend, actually 4 rehearsal shows to kind of go through scenarios that would play out. And some of the scenarios that did play out was that we would have to kill time. So it was Heidi Petracek and I on the desk, along with David and Lori. So I had lots of options for who to talk to.
Using the results board on election night allows people to see what's going on, and you can see the blue wave that swept across Nova Scotia. There was a blue wave in British Columbia, conservative strength in Saskatchewan. And with a federal election coming in the new year, the expectation is that blue wave could sweep across Canada. We'll have all of those results whenever that federal election is next year, right here on Global News.
There is a wildfire burning south of the town, and everyone in Jasper is now being ordered to leave.
The evacuation alert, I think it caught a lot of people off guard. They talked about, having been in the middle of their evening dinner plans, a walk on the beach. Nobody really expected it to get so serious so quickly.
A dream vacation coming to a nightmarish end in Jasper National Park.
There's ash coming down from the sky. We made the decision and we just kind of left as soon as we could.
We heard them just talking about just inching their way out of town for long periods of time. It was just a chaotic scene that night.
This is an example of just how volatile.
I'll always remember that around 6 o'clock at night, we were doing live hits and it looked like it was midnight.
There was no way to hold back the flames. Fire crews say it was a monster, and this is what it did. The flames, they say, moved 5 kilometers in less than an hour.
And at that point, everyone was just astonished. We were being told to, take cover because there was a golf ball size hail.
This fire created its own thunderstorm system, because that's just how massive it is. All you can do is basically get out.
It has been an incredibly difficult day for many, many folks in Jasper, and as well, it's drawn emotion out of Premier Danielle Smith.
We share the sense of loss.
People were hunkered down, in hotels or at friends' houses, or they were camping, completely unaware what they're going to be going back to and what was still standing and what was not. And then they released a map and it outlined what was still there and what wasn't. That was a heavy day. That was a heavy day.
I see 67 years.
The town's mayor not spared from the wreckage or the anguish. His family home in ruins.
The incident commander lost her home, and the fire chief also lost his home. And in some cases, they actually saw their houses burning, but could do nothing because they knew what their priority had to be.
It's unfathomable how you can go through so much grief and then step back and say, okay, but I'm part of the bigger picture.
Members of the media were escorted into the fire zone.
Wow. And I'll just never forget that feeling in my lungs. It just was like a burning. It was such a surreal and emotional time. I was choking back tears. Everybody has a connection to Jasper.
Everything that people put their lives around, you can smell it, and then when you start to see it, it just hits you that these people have a lot to go through before they get back to what they consider a normal life.
Row after row after row of buildings burned, and you know those are people's houses. We really tried to approach that tour with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of care. We didn't shoot any of the homes on the west side of town because some people didn't know if their home was still standing or not, and we didn't want them to find out through those images.
I think what officials really are trying to drive home here is that 70% of this town is still standing. And they want residents to know that despite the long road that lies ahead for them, there is still mountains of hope.
That was really striking, the amount of resiliency and love and kindness that everyone in the broader community, Jasper and beyond, really showed to one another.
It's just great to see everyone rallying around a cause and wanting to be there for a beloved place.
How much a community can pull together in a crisis. And Alberta did it again. And the world. And they came together in the most beautiful way.
It was early August and we've been hearing about Storm Deb for days. States of emergency down in the southern U.S., canceled flights.
Well, Montreal could get pounded with heavy rain in the coming days as Tropical Storm Deb leaves its mark on the region.
I don't think anybody thought it was going to be as bad as it ended up being.
Drivers swerving around gushing waters, other less lucky ones completely stuck. And even public transport couldn't stay dry.
Just water bursting in the middle of the highway, and everybody just like trying to avoid it and not get caught. I felt lucky that I didn't myself get stuck in an underpass.
And the worst of it is just now beginning.
Remnants of Tropical Storm Deb have paralyzed parts of the city, turning roadways into rivers.
I got a text from the group chat with my family, my parents saying their basement had been flooded.
I started to get calls from friends, my family that were having water in their basements, and everyone was, immediately went into panic mode, and it was really difficult to witness, both personally and then professionally.
Where do you start?
The Soren family assessed the devastating damage done to their home on Friday night.
So I don't have a car and I don't have a house to live in.
People that have been living in their homes for 10, 15, 20, 30 years that have never had any sort of water.
Probably the most helpless I've ever felt.
Major highways were temporarily paralyzed, including the Trans-Canada. In Laval, this hotel parking lot became a lake. The Laurentians and Lanaudière regions north of Montreal saw landslides. About 300 people evacuated due to overflowing rivers. More than 100 roads washed out.
Her belongings remained submerged in 8 feet of water for almost 2 days.
People wanted to share their story and what is being lost.
Though most residents have insurance, many believe it won't be nearly enough to cover it all. For me, this situation was a bit unique because of the fact that it was happening in my community, in the neighborhood where I grew up, where I still live with my family now. In this part of Pierrefonds, there's hardship almost everywhere you look. 65-year-old Nadia Cerrone has been living with the remnants of Friday's torrential rainfall for 5 days. I felt really like a little bit of fire in me to get her story out and to reach out to city officials for her and provincial officials and say, hey, there are people that are older that cannot get their stuff out of their basement. Where's the help?
You definitely feel like you are witnessing climate change. And you really realize that you are reporting just like one snippet of a crisis that's affecting so many people.
Everybody's still cleaning up from Debbie. A week later, a huge 84-inch water main bursts just east of downtown.
The images are still hard to believe. Water blasting 20 meters into the air for hours.
That whole area got flooded. Homes, businesses. We couldn't believe it in the newsroom, honestly. Everybody's just like, man, this is a really bad stretch for our water infrastructure.
Some business owners on the ground floor are estimating losses in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like Morin.
It's going to be near $1 million for us.
I think I lost count of how many smelly, wet buildings I was in during those times. You realize our water network does not have the capacity to deal with storms this big, and they're only getting more frequent because of climate change.
Mayor Valerie Plante says 10 sponge parks are already set up across the city.
And there's 30 that are coming up in different areas as well.
The city is investing $800 million a year to upgrade sewers.
People can't get insurance in some areas, property values are going down. It's a major issue.
There are a lot of things that I think our authorities need to do to prevent things like this from happening again. I think it's our jobs as journalists to keep bringing it up, to make sure that, you know, these conversations are had.
The water came fast and furious, flooding a busy road, a grocery store parking lot, and an entire baseball diamond.
City officials say it is a catastrophic break, causing water levels to drop dangerously low.
Crews are working right now, and just showing up to the scene, you can immediately tell this is not just a regular water main break that we deal with on a regular basis.
We continue to follow the breaking news for you that is impacting this entire city.
This was completely different. It was the middle of summer. This was a major roadway that they had shut down, and we knew at that point this was going to be serious.
Calgary's most important feeder main, that moves up to 60% of the city's drinking water, had to be shut off. The highest level of water restrictions were put in place for the whole city.
If we do not stick to water reductions, we will run out of water. That's a fact.
As repairs began, water conservation tips became part of our coverage.
Even little things like only turning the tap on to a trickle when you wash your hands can make a big difference.
Full loads in your dishwasher, full loads in your washing machine, short showers.
Watering your garden, washing your car, running the sprinkler, it was all banned. Many collected rainwater instead.
This is liquid gold. This is going to be valuable in the future.
We were going through in our own household and we were trying to figure out how we could best save our own water. We had a newborn baby at that point. We were trying to make sure that we had enough water to make formula, that we had enough that we had to do bath time.
In the neighborhood where the break happened, at times there was no water at all.
It is very disconcerting to put on your tap and have nothing come out.
Traffic reporter Leslie Horton lives in Bowness, where she was working to make sure she and her neighbors had clean water.
It's been very hard. Like, we're struggling.
This is our second trip. We have luckily a large bucket, so we've been relying on that.
The community of Bowness, as usual, jumped into action, and before long, you could pop to the community association. They had cases of water there. They're like, come on, what do you need? Can we help get this home for you? Because there's many in our community that can't come and get water and take it home.
All the while, crews were working 24 hours a day, every day, to get the pipe back online.
Of course, the stampede was coming up. There was a lot of big things happening. It was right ahead of the summer season here in Calgary. So there was a big sense of urgency to get these repairs done.
The taps were turned on in time for stampede, but then more areas of concern were found. Restrictions would be in place from the end of August to the end of September, when the water system was finally brought fully online again.
We did hits with our national affiliates because it was something that they understood could happen to them. And we did see something similar happen in Montreal shortly afterwards.
And with tens of millions of dollars spent on the repairs, now a number of reports are working to determine exactly what caused the break.
Now there's a lot of questions about how do you prevent this from happening in the future, and maybe some of those answers we're still waiting to hear.
Well, there you have it, a behind-the-scenes look at some of this year's biggest Canadian news stories. And now we leave you with a look at the dazzling Christmas light displays from around the world. I'm Carolyn Jarvis. On behalf of our entire Global News team, we wish you a happy holidays.